Okay, guys, welcome to this morning's autumn Fife property market show. This is about the autumn market view. Planning your spring move now could save you more time and money overall. Now, you kind of think the way things are going in the media, guys, that now's no the time to move and just to stay put and don't do anything. But we know that most people actually move because of their circumstances. You don't move house just for the sake of a house. You move because you've got a bigger family. Maybe something's happened in your situation. You've got to live in separate houses now. Possibly you want to downsize. So moving house is actually more forced by, well, I wouldn't say forced by, dictated by your circumstances, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely dictated by a circumstance. People don't just decide to move overnight. There's a reason that drives you towards that, and it's generally something that's been discussed for months actually before you get to that point, isn't it? And then you get to a stage where actually your current life, however you're living it, whether it's increasing family, decreasing family, separate or whatever, it drives you to make that final decision. And that doesn't matter if it's spring, winter, summer. It drives you, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. People might actually wonder where I am today. It's like no usual studio, eh? I'm actually at the Excel with a property investor show. I'm finding out about the swap rates, the Bank of England, how inflation will affect the property market, how interest rates will affect the property market, how the banks actually think. So we're getting knowledgeable information from people that are key in the industry in order to determine where the market's going and what we need to advise to our clients. That's ultimately why I'm here today. And I was there yesterday as well. So you've probably seen some of the videos. And if you haven't, take a chance to check them out, because one of them actually talks about inflation, from Mike Bristow of Crowd Property Funding, who's actually very influential in the market. And also you've got Andy Hayes, which Simon Zushi's second in command, the PIN meetings, which is the Property Investors Network. He's talking about the Bank of England base rates and how that affects everything as well, and the swap rates. So the swap rates are what they use in the lending market. So in other words, it's what they think they're going to need to forecast the rates to be, which will determine the Bank of England's base rates, which will determine the bank's interest rates that they would charge on mortgages. So, for example, if you can only get a swap rate between banks or between lenders, at a higher level, for example, maybe 5%, you can't go out and say you can give somebody a mortgage at 4%. And that's the reality. So we're finding out all about that and where swap rates are actually going. So if you get a chance, as I said, on these posts before us, you'll be able to tune in on them. And I might do some other live broadcasts today with people who are influential in the market. It has been quite a week for property, although it's always a hot topic in the press. And the amount of coverage last week was completely off the scale, wasn't it?
Completely off the scale. I don't think we've seen we always talk about headline news, don't we? It's kind of that CNN, isn't it? Constant negative news that we hear. But there's definitely a lot of strap lines in. You switch your Sky News on, BBC broadcast, that's all you're kind of seeing, and it's definitely changing every day. And I don't know about you, Jimmy, but certainly the people that I've been out to visit this week, it's the constant topic of conversation.
Yeah. Is it?
Are you finding that, Jimmy?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, it is, but it's more people, I would say, not necessarily always about the prices. It's more affordability with mortgages, etc. Right now, I've had a couple of conversations with Neil Bird recently, and he's had a pretty busy week of it. So yeah, I think it's just exploring all options and making sure you're making the best one for you. People are still moving, as we've said earlier. People move for circumstances, so there'll always be a market.
Yeah, and the best advice for I would give anybody in terms of their mortgage, if their mortgage is coming at an end soon, then by all means, speak to your mortgage broker anyway, and speak to your mortgage broker in the short term, even though it's coming to an end in 6 months, maybe even 12 months, just so you know where you are for forward planning. That's all you need to do. That's my best advice for that. Do you not think that there's a lot of scaremongering going on in the media?
There is a lot of scaremongering, and I think that actually we talked about this the other day when we did our show, didn't we, about the interest rates, etc. I think it's really important for people to educate themselves on fact, not on headlines, which is what we're seeing just now, isn't it?
But I mean, as the dust settles after the mini budget, it's funny that how you just think mini budget and we just laugh.
I know.
Is that how everybody else feels about that when you hear the word mini budget? It's like, and folk just think that's quite jovial, and the fact that there was no forecasting, there was no planning, there was no asking anybody else. It's just like, let's just come up with this. It sounds like a great idea.
Exactly, Jim. I mean, before we came onto the show, you were showing me the view from your window because you're right near London City Airport, and you know the planes are turning. But I think she turned even quicker than those planes turned.
Definitely. You might be wondering. Well, that goes against their whole principle about the fact that they might be turning, but the lady is not for turning. See how I caught that?
Exactly.
If she wants to mimic her, if she wants to mimic Margaret Thatcher, she's certainly not doing anything like that at all.
No.
You might be wondering
Absolutely.
what it all means if you're planning to sell your home either now or early next year. Autumn has always been the underrated season for selling, and actually we did a show and a blog on that previously, so you can click on that link in this post if you want to see that on why it's such a great time to sell. The golden leaves make streets and gardens look wonderful for photos and for viewings, while the pressures of Christmas and school holiday deadlines are actually gone. But is that enough for 2022? Well, actually, yes. Despite all the initial shocks and scary headlines, the mini budget hasn't been all bad news for the property market. In fact, the ground has been laid to support more home ownership from the bottom run of the ladder. And we're going to talk about this initially about stamp duty changes in England and talk about where Scotland could be. And if you do have plans to sell up and buy your next home in spring, there are real benefits to taking action now, and you'll discover as we go on in the show here. Stamp duty, will stamp duty cuts make a difference in England, Perry?
Okay, no, I think it's a bit of a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, whether or not Scotland follows suit, we just don't know that yet, do we? Whether that same stamp duty cuts will be put in place that have gone into England and Wales. But I think their effects will filter through the whole property market, which inevitably will have a knock-on effect on the Fife market, won't it? Because we see an influx of people to Fife. I mean, God, you constantly say it, Jim, but we do live in such a beautiful corner of the UK, don't we? And
God's country.
God's country, exactly. And, we do see, I know that this isn't always favourable for some, but, we constantly talk about holiday homes and things like that. And yes, there is a factor of that. But actually, we're seeing much less of that holiday home element to it because of the way that people's lives have changed, isn't it? And people who maybe have always come to the East Neuk and to Fife as a whole, because we've got some beautiful parts to it other than just the East Neuk of it. But they're coming here now and they're saying, well, actually, I don't just need to holiday, I can buy a house here. So we are seeing an influx. So that impact to the Welsh and the English market will eventually have a knock-on effect, even if Scotland stays as it is, don't you think?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, Rightmove recorded a 10% increase in activity after the Chancellor's announcement. And from that, we're seeing right now the likely short-term effects will look something like this. A honeymoon period that spurs the market on until at least the Bank of England's next meeting on the 3rd of November. More first-time buyers entering the market at the bottom end, leading to more first-time sellers actually trading up. That's probably key as well. Remember that the English market is actually, I mean, when you look at the average price in England, it's about 350,000 if I was going to take a guess. It's round about there in the UK, compared to the average price in Fife, which is 168,000. It's a bit of a no-brainer if we're all earning the same amount of money on average, and the fact that you can buy a house for half the price than the rest of the UK, especially England. The multiplier effect is something like 9 times your salary for England, and in Fife it's like 5.5 times, in Scotland it's 6.5 times. So Fife is extremely more affordable for people to actually stay. And yet you're within 25 miles. If you bang yourself right in the middle of Fife, you're within 25 miles of the beach.
Exactly.
Well, actually, less than 25 miles because you're in the middle. 25 miles is the width of Fife, really. I think from Edinburgh, the Edinburgh side, Queensferry, to Newport. So that's about 25 miles there. So you're about 12 miles. You're almost within half an hour of the beach anywhere you are in Fife. And especially you've got an opportunity to stay near the beach. It's perfect. I mean, we kind of just take this for granted, don't we? It's like you used to say, it'd be great going to Disneyland every day, and people that live near Disneyland go, okay, it's overrated.
It's true though, isn't it? We do kind of
Because
take for granted what's around us.
you get completely complacent about the whole thing.
You do.
The upfront cost of buying a property have been a long-standing barrier for many first-time buyers. With the stamp duty changes in England, making over 60% of their homes in Wales exempt from the tax as well, and resulting enthusiasm to buy at the moment is worth tapping into. Now, Scotland, will Scotland follow suit in terms of the stamp duty? Well, I've got a funny feeling no. Because when you think about the average price point being 192,000 to buy a house in Scotland, you're looking at a differential of the 140,000 as the threshold for exemption. You've got a 50 grand difference. So 2% of 50 grand is literally £1,000. So you're only paying £1,000 extra stamp duty to buy the average home in Scotland even for a first time buyer. So, I can't imagine that's going to break the bank for anybody. And it's going to be a barrier to anybody entering into the market. What's your thoughts on that, Jimmy?
If it's the margins that you're talking about, if they're cutting it that fine in terms of being able to afford a house, then you probably need to assess whether it's actually affordable for them to do it in the first place. If they're cutting it that fine, especially with the cost of living right now. What I think about the stamp duty in England and Wales, we will find maybe a lot more of them still coming to Scotland, because what they're looking at is they're saving X amount of money. We can spend that on something else. It's not very often people like yourself hoard it away and go and spend it on another property. They always think about their life right now and go and chuck it into an upsize or a 3-bed semi in Kent or something like that, and come in to buy a 5-bedroom detached in somewhere in Fife.
My mother always used to say it myself. I don't know what it is about you, Jim, but money always burns a hole in your pocket. It doesn't now, by the way. I'm completely, my mindset's completely changed. But when I was younger, I did that. It was like I had to spend on something. And do you not think that's like quite a lot of people still? Because they get more money, they just have to spend on something. And when they look at how much it's going to, people don't think about how much it costs them overall. They just think about how much it costs them in the payment. So if the mortgage payment is within tolerance, and in other words, they can afford it, then it gives them a bigger house. They'll go and buy a bigger house.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I had a client in Kirkcaldy a few months ago. He was getting a new job in Dundee, so he sat down. He said, if I move close, I want to stay in Fife. I want to move maybe to Cooper, so my commute's less, but the property prices are more expensive there. And I said, let's break it down. So you want to stay in Kirkcaldy, let's work out how much it's going to cost you to commute, petrol money, going back and forward, the price of the house that you want, how much more that'll be on the mortgage. It was actually better off moving house than staying in Kirkcaldy, because the cost of commute was going to cost him more on his mortgage driving back into and from Dundee every single day. So you got to look at it properly and speak to the right people.
And then you've got the time involved in the drive.
Exactly.
Which when you've got a young family, is one of the most important things ever. The reason I understand that completely is that's what happened with me with Standard Life. I worked at Standard Life and commuted from Fife into Edinburgh every single day. And then when you worked out the differentiation of the cost of transport to Edinburgh every single day, and then the time involved, which was almost 2 hours out of my day every day, maybe 2.5 hours, it made absolute sense just to get a local job at a lesser salary. And even the local job at less of a salary was actually still better off by the time that I saved. So it made absolute sense just to work locally. So I get that straight away, and it's often people overlook that, don't they?
Yeah. You need to look at the numbers, not just a bit single-mindedly. You need to look at the bigger picture in terms of everything.
I tell you what, though, Jimmy, it's interesting, but do you think any other estate agents actually sit down with their clients and actually say that to them?
I wouldn't want to say. I would probably say, I would guess they would say,
sell your house.
Let's just get it on the market. Yeah. So yeah, that's probably what.
If you're watching out there, or you're listening in, have you ever had an estate agent sit in front of you and said, maybe you shouldn't sell for that reason, or maybe you have to consider this as well, maybe you should consider the time of travel because of your circumstances? I'd be interested to hear anybody's comments about, have they ever had an estate agent actually sit down with them and say that to them? The conversation I had the other day with Perry, with a lady in Anstruther. We concluded after it, and I just said to her, look, to be honest, your house is fit for purpose now. It's exactly what you need it. You'll literally spend about £300 or £400 to make the adaptations about where you are, and you can continue to live where you are right now, and you don't need to move at all. And she could not believe it. She says, I'm sorry, I wasted your time getting you out here. If that's the case, I feel really bad for it. I went, but that wasn't the point of me coming out. The point of me coming out was actually to tell you the best advice, to give you the right information to make the decision that you need to take for you. It's not about me selling your house. It's about me giving you the right advice. It's about us giving them the right advice in order for them to ascertain whether they should be selling or not at this point in time. That's the most important thing. The money, I hate to say it, and I keep saying it all the time, the money's a byproduct of what you do well. That's it, really. Yeah. If you do an extremely fantastic job and you give people the right advice, the money flows as a result of what you do well. It shouldn't be the other way around. It shouldn't be we're needing the money because we're needing to run a business. It should be what's the best advice for you as the customer.
I completely agree with that, actually. And just to endorse that, Jim, I did send you feedback on that yesterday, because part of our process, when you have your appointments, as you know, is that I will always contact the person the next day to say, how did the meeting go? Did they feel it went well? Did they get good advice? Were they left with any questions? Really just as a follow-up to ensure that we're providing what they need. And actually the feedback from that particular lady was she did feel that she had wasted your time, but actually she's, to quote her, what an amazing man. He's made my life so much less stressful, and I can put those things in place. And for her, that was massive, because there's a lot going on in that home just now. There was pressure points for her. And the automatic reaction was, I need to sell the house. I need to move. I need to do this. And actually, she didn't need to do all those things. So even if that short-term relief in her circumstances can get her through the next 6 months, that was massive for her. And she just did not expect that at all. So you're right, it's not just about selling houses. What we do, and a lot of the purposes of these shows and that as well, was really just to provide people with information so that people can actually make good judgments for their life, their circumstances, and whatever's changing in their world on that day.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's bring ourselves on then, and we'll talk about mortgages now. Are there actually any mortgages still available, Perry?
Yeah, I mean, it's not often we use the words wild and mortgage in the same sentence, is it? But the week after September's mini budget, we just saw it go crazy. We talked about that earlier in the show, and it was possibly the wildest week ever in the mortgage market. We saw mortgages getting pulled, and it's like there's no mortgages left. And okay, there was maybe about 1,000 were pulled, but there's still a good few thousand options out there, aren't there? So lenders removed a record number of products. But it's also worth remembering that on the April 1st of 2020, hundreds of mortgages were also withdrawn as the lockdown began. But people still moved in lockdown. So yes, mortgages are still available. And I think we're going to talk about, how we believe that is so, and some factors to consider.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed yesterday when we were talking about the mortgage market at the Crowd Property Fund in Mike Bristol, he was talking about the lenders. What you don't realise that the lenders actually pulled all their fixed rate mortgages straight away because they knew the swap rates would be affected, and that would then affect them if everybody piled into fixed rate mortgages and they were stuck with a liability they couldn't fulfil. And that's what they were worried about. So they immediately pulled all the fixed rate mortgages in order to stop that, but they left the tracker rates and the discounted rates still there. That was the key. And then what they've done as well is they've actually, a couple of days later, they actually went back and introduced them again. But you didn't hear that part on the news, did you? You just heard the part of they pulled all the fixed rate mortgages. You didn't hear the bit like they brought some of them back in. And I'll show you right now and here the example of that. Because we talked about this. They were saying it, 6% base rates and all the rest of it. But that is not the case. Look, there's a 2-year tracker at 3.14. There's a 2-year tracker 3.2, 3.3. So they're all trackers there as well. But let's look to see if I could find any fixed. Where's the fixed? Just to update that. And skip. There you go. 4.95 fixed for 2 years. 10-year at 4.96. Where is that scary thing about, mortgage rates at fixed rates are over 6% now? Well, wait a minute. There's a 10-year fixed rate at 4.96. And to be honest, that's a good deal. That's a really good deal. There's a 5-year at 5.09. So it's, and there's there's Royal Bank of Scotland, 5.09. There's the Nationwide, 5.09. There's the Barclays at 5.12. There's a 5-year from Barclays at 5.14. So it's just all media hype and spin, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, they talk about the average mortgage being 6%, but I don't know about you guys, but whoever settled for average, I'll have the cheapest, thanks.
And that's the thing. It's like, if it's average, that means some people are above and half the people are below. So 50% of the people are actually below that. But nobody actually thinks about that. They just focus on 6% and then they just get frightened because of it. So it's all perspective. That's what you have to look at. Lenders are already introducing products after reassessing the economy and the market. Interest rates will probably continue to rise in the short term. So finding a home now and securing a mortgage could mean getting a cheaper deal than you would next year. And looking for mortgage offers with expiry dates of 6 months will give you enough time to complete the conveyancing process for a move in the spring. And even if you're remortgaging, if you've got it in 6 months' time, you could look at it now as well to remortgage. Some lenders are actually allowing you to then put yourself on a new deal now because they're not particularly bothered. All they do is want to make money. And if the swap rate with the economy, with the Bank of England, if the swap rates and all that are at work, then all they're doing is when they get the mortgage at the fixed rate now, they fix that in with the people that they're getting the money off of. So everybody's fixed in at that deal. It's like bonds. You know, if a bond is like 5% return for 5 years, that's what you're getting. And then you can take that bond and say to someone else, I tell you what, I'll sell you that at a higher rate than I bought it because you're getting a 5% fixed rate return and everybody else is getting a 2% now. So that's obviously a better return for you. So that's why the bond is worth more. It's classic economics and supply and demand in terms of how it works. So the mortgage, there's loads of mortgage products out there. I mean, apparently there's over 3,000 mortgage products still there. Never something that was in the credit crunch. The credit crunch, every single mortgage almost got pulled on the same day. And there was nothing left for anybody to do. The complete liquidity of the market had gone. This is a statistic for you. I heard in lockdown, households saved up a total of £180 billion in lockdown. There's a huge amount of money sloshing about in the economy. Still, 180 billion was saved in lockdown from all UK households. Now, we're all going to say we've got no money, but let's be honest.
You've got a wee stash.
Well, everybody out there as well, and we're actually really pleading poverty for some of us. And that's what you've got to be realistic about. You know, we'll say it's like, oh, it's going to cost us a lot more to do this and a lot more to do that. And it's like, you know, but some of us have, you know, savings tucked aside from probably lockdown and stuff like that they've been able to capitalise on. And now is probably the time to use it. I mean, you've got to use it at some point. You can't take it with you.
I think that's why
you can't take it with you.
And that's probably why prices have risen so much in Fife, because people have been saving it and pumping it into things that can potentially make the money.
Jimmy, yes, I can't disagree with you at that statement, and the fact that there is a lot of money out there. There's a huge correction had to happen in the market in terms of property prices anyway, because they were completely undervalued. I mean, some of the flats were actually at the prices of the credit crunch 15 years ago. You know, so I mean, how could you say that the price of a flat in Fife hasn't actually increased in the last 15 years? That's weird. There has to be some sort of increase, especially if inflationary pressure is there as well. So, you know, it was just a natural realignment of the economy. It's just so happened it's all happened at once and combined itself with things like the utility prices going up as well, and food prices going up as well, and scarcity of resources of grain and cereals and that around the world from other countries based on the war in Ukraine. But what you have to look at as well is the underlying price of timber. Remember, the timber was the one that everybody was using as the benchmark for prices going up. And timber went up, I think it was, I'm not sure if it's measured in kilos, but when it first started in 2019, timber was about $400, maybe $500 per kilo or brick, or, you know, whatever it's called, how they measure it. And it went up to about 3, possibly even 4 times that. Do you know now it's back down at 499? So it's actually the same price timber as it was in 2019, but we don't hear that in the news. We don't hear that inflationary pressure possibly isn't there anymore. It's just we've all got this scaremongering, and they want us to run about like, if everybody remembers Henny Penny and Chicken Little in your stories when you were younger, the world's falling in, the sky's falling in. It's like that's what everybody wants us to do. The media want us to do that because it gets them more stories, it gets them more headlines, it gets them more traction. If you've got somebody that's paid to do a job like that, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to find that, or they're out of a job. So they need people to say that. That's why you get somebody dragged out in the middle of nowhere into your news program, and you look at them and go, where the hell has that person come from? It's like it's like somebody out the back of Beyond that they've just dragged out, and they just want them to justify their story. It's like, yeah, I think the Chancellor's got 5 heads. I saw it the other day when they took their mask off. It's some, and if they get somebody to say that, then it's, oh, it must be right. It's on the news.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like all the headlines creating the perfect storm, but when things start to calm down, they forget to tell everyone, don't they?
No, they don't, because it's like nobody wants to know about good news. Martin Lewis had this years and years ago. Was it Martin Lewis? No, Martin. No, one of the newscasters that did years and years ago. He actually left the BBC. I remember him doing a talk with us at one of our conventions. It probably was about 25 years ago. He came to one of our conventions. He did a talk with us, and he actually got voted and as an MP as well, because his campaign was based on the fact that the media was completely negative about everything, and they didn't want to talk about good news stories. And when he suggested that to the BBC at the time when he worked for them, they just laughed at him and said, maybe it's time for you to leave. Genuinely,
that's not our message.
Yeah, I read his book. It's absolutely fantastic. So it's hard. Listen, to summarise this, it's hard to say exactly where the mortgage market will be in 2023. But with everything pointing towards higher interest rates, getting your plans underway can now save you thousands of pounds. Now, I think there'll be loads and loads of products still there. There is one other thing to think about in terms of your mortgage. If you've got a mortgage right now, speak to your lender, possibly about increasing the term maybe by another 10 years in the short term. And if you increase it by another 10 years, it'll bring the monthly payment down to what you had before. If it's a rate, it's actually going up because it's maybe on a tracker, or it's maybe on a discount, or it's maybe variable. Well, maybe variable is not any good because it's to do with that. So if you increase it just that extra 10 years, it brings your rate down to the rate you're paying right now, even if interest rates have gone up. So that might be a way to do it. Now, that's only a short-term strategy, because in the long term, you actually pay a lot more money. You might want to do that, because again, I come back to saying that most people base their decisions on how much they can afford every month, to determine what they can afford to borrow to buy a house, and then that determines how they buy their house. To be honest, I'd say, go for what you need rather than what you want. And that's the most important thing. If you're in a house and your house does the job what it does now, maybe just change the kitchen and maybe just change the bathroom if you don't like it. Don't move house if that's the case. And I know that sounds daft for an estate agent saying that, but that's probably my best advice. You don't need to move if you don't really need to move. I know people want to move, but it's got to be a need to move more than anything at this point in time, I would say. So I think transaction numbers will drop next year. I do think transaction numbers, the market's forecasting the number of properties getting sold next year will actually drop as well. But that's normal. That's normal at a time like this. So what's happening with property prices then?
Well, it's easy to get wrapped up in second guessing the market. Yeah. That's what a lot of people are doing when I'm going out. What am I expecting to get less to value? What am I expecting to get over? Do I get more, less, etc.? But people are moving home for so many reasons, and they're always about life moving forward, or obviously looking to try and get on to the next chapter. We rarely meet anyone who sees buying as a home as purely financial transaction. It's always far deeper than that. Perry, do you have some info on prices?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do, but just before I go into that as well, just to touch on what Jim was saying there as well about this 10-year thing and about how people can stretch it out, and if people do need to move in to do that, I think it's really important to remember as well that actually the 10 years I wouldn't get wrapped up in. I would focus on that monthly payment, because actually you go with what your circumstances are now. In that 10-year window, so much is probably going to change in your life, and actually that 10-year becomes an irrelevant thing. So it's just about how you get through today and next year, isn't it? So I think that's what people should focus on as well more. But, you know, nonetheless, I mean, there are some price information shares that we can give. So, I mean, although year-on-year price rose by 9.5% in September, Nationwide's figures also show that month-on-month prices also stalled. Would we have expected that, Jim?
Well, remember, Nationwide's only over all their customers. That's the thing for that. So Nationwide is actually just with their customers. Same with Zoopla. Same with people like. So you do get different statistics that come out, and Nationwide says, "Oh, our property prices have moved up X amount," and you're like, "Well, the land registry has just come out after that and said property prices have actually moved that." And the land registry is actually the everything, every single transaction in the UK. That's so for me personally. You know, I kind of look at the land registry all the time. But yeah, year-on-year prices have actually increased by 9.5%. Scotland is 8.8, or in Fife it's 8.8, I would say, and that's fine. But they will stall. It's, you know, nobody knows what prices will do, but it's probably safe to say that homes have actually reached their peak in values for a wee while yet. But the key here is, as I said, it's a normal price correction. Well, a normal price alignment. I wouldn't say it's a correction. It's just a realignment of where the prices should be in comparison to what we're earning. Remember, 20 years ago, we earned 50% of what we earn now on average. So, you know, how could you continue to earn double the amount of money than you did 20 years ago, but the prices are now actually going up in property? And they've not gone up for a considerable amount of time. And then all of a sudden, they just went boom. And that's probably quite normal to happen, because everybody then realizes and starts to buy properties pretty quick all at the same time. So I think that's where we are. Predictions for property slumps, for example, after Brexit and COVID, completely failed to materialise. You know, and it's the ongoing lack of supply is widely expected to avoid a severe crash, and it will continue to be like that.
I completely agree with that.
More money sloshing about in the economy.
I would agree with that completely. I think that we also an unprecedented and unexpected turn in the market when just after COVID, etc., didn't we? You know, no one really, we sat probably having similar conversations that we're having just now, you know, what is it going to mean for us and how is it going to look? And no one could have predicted what happened.
Absolutely. I'm going to say a couple of good mornings. Good morning, Angela. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. Good morning, Madalena. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. Anybody else out there watching as well, please feel free to ask if you've got any questions at what we're talking about. So why is buyer demand still so high then?
I think it's the dream of almost everyone in the UK to own their own home, really. And in the words of Rightmove, the market remains surprisingly resilient despite growing economic pressures. In fact, buyer demand is up 20% on the pre-pandemic 5-year average. So I think if you were, I actually been reading a bit of stuff on Rightmove recently, and when I've been telling people this on, excuse me, on consultations, they can't believe it. They would think, but is the people not cost of living, etc. But they are. You can only go off the facts.
6 months ago, buyer demand was sitting at 40% up on 5-year averages. And it's 20. I was going to say it's just 20%, but it's still up on the 5-year average. And yet the last 5 years we thought, we've been going pretty well. The economy's been going pretty well. The housing market's doing pretty well, and the buyer demand is still 20% up on that 5-year average. So that's quite a lot, and it's quite resilient for it to maintain like that. But it's not surprising when you think you take into account some of the following factors. I mean, what could we take into account, Perry?
I think what you need to look at as well is the number of homes that are coming to market has returned to 2019 levels, and that's fine. But there still aren't enough to go around. You know, we've still got people who are struggling to get that property that they're looking for. When you do your Sunday update, Jim, we could see that in some areas of Fife, supply and demand, you know, the demand is outweighing what the supply is. And some weeks that's not the case, but, you know, we're looking at week snapshots. But when you looked at the overall month, excuse me, there just wasn't enough property going around, and that's.
I don't think there's ever going to be enough unless they build more houses, but it has to be more affordable, more social housing. And I mean council housing when I talk about social housing. I'm not talking about housing associations, because the best person to run social housing is the council, because the council take different decisions as opposed to a housing association, which is a for-profit company. Let's be honest, they're doing mid-market rents now, so they are a for-profit company.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing. We need to build more affordable and more social housing to accommodate the 70% it was lost since the 1980s, which was a big sell-off by the Conservative government at that time. We never ever replaced that, and that's what's caused the problem. That'll bring us on the rental market in a minute. But it will still maintain like that, because if you look at over Scotland, and we talked about England at this conference yesterday as well, they've failed to reach their targets. I mean, England's got a 350,000 target, and they've only been doing 160,000 every year.
50%.
Scotland's got a 25,000 target, and they're only doing about 15,000 to 18,000 every year. So every year they're on the back foot by, they've got more and more accumulating in the background to actually build up on. And it's getting worse and worse. And I keep talking about the fact that if the average lifespan goes up 1 year, then it means we've got to find another, almost in the UK, another 400,000 houses on top of what we can't do in the first place. Needless to say, we can't even build the houses quick enough because we don't have the skills. We've got 1.1 million people chasing 1.3 million jobs. So we've now got the infrastructure, we've now got the people there, and it takes years to get people trained up to do anything. Especially if you're looking at things like pharmaceuticals. Doctor takes 7 years, accountant takes 7 years, pharmacy takes 7 years. A lot of these things take 7 years to actually develop these skills. And if we've not done anything like that, then we're going to be here for quite a long time in terms of the housing market as well. Dare I say, even a brickie is a skilled job. A plasterer is a skilled job. We don't do apprenticeships anymore. So we don't have these skills available to do that. I'm going to say we, but I've been beating this drum for years, so I wouldn't like to think we, as in me as well, because I don't believe that what the UK government and the Scottish government's been doing for years has been appropriate. We should have been investing in infrastructure improvements and training and skills in order to develop the workforce for the forecasting economy it was to come. And if you're going to forecast the economy, surely you should have to make sure that all these skills are in place in order to accommodate for that. And you can't just say, I think we're going to need 250 houses or 250,000 houses, and then find out you're only building 160,000, and then say, well, we'll just see if it sorts itself out. That's a laissez-faire attitude. In other words, the market will decide, and we'll leave it to the businesses to, the Adam Smith laissez-faire. We'll leave it to the market to decide exactly what they need to do in order to train these people with the skills. It's like, no, that's why you vote people into power, in order to help run the infrastructure and the economy, and help run the government, and help run all the services that are available and administered by the government. That's why they're there. They're not there just to take the job.
I think you're right, and I think that within their strapline, they are public servants. So, hello, that's everyone.
Yeah. So this brings us on to the rental market as well. The knock-on effect of this now is there's more homeowners, and in the last 5 years, in Fife anyway, there's about 9,000 more new homeowners. There's actually 1,400 less private let properties in the last 5 years available in Fife. And we're saying now that the rental market is getting worse and worse as landlords exit the market and give tenants notice, because of things like the rent freeze, because of things like the moratorium on evictions. This is almost like, God dare I say it, this is almost like an abusive relationship with the government, the Scottish government, with landlords. In other words, that we've been the sacrificial lambs for years, and I say we because I'm a private landlord as well. I've been for 30 years. We've been sacrificial lambs for the last 30 years, but the ultimate has happened now, where they've actually said, well, you're just going to take the hit for all the rising costs for everybody's bills, and we're going to fence, and you're not going to put them up, so you've got nowhere to go if your costs start to go up and you can't pass that on at all. So that's going to squeeze a lot of landlords out the market, but it's fine. The final straw has been given. I mean, most people will put up with some sort of some sort of, God, dare I say, from the government, some sort of abuse. It's like, it's the only way I could explain it. It's some sort of, and then eventually the straw that breaks the camel back come along, and they say, right, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Think about it. Look at independence. That's exactly the same relationship, isn't it? It's like you're completely. It's the sort of the same thing. Some people out there feel they've been abused by the UK government, and they think the same way, and they think, right, that's it. We've had enough. We're going. And then they're going, no, you're not going. I'm going to put legislation in place to keep you here. See that relationship between two parties? No, I'm not going to let you go. I'm going to stop you going. And that makes it even worse, because you're afraid that they'll leave now. So you stop them from going. And guess what? They pull even more, and they want to go even more. Let things go, and they will naturally come back as a result of the fact that you've let it go. That's the key here. They should never have done that. We would have helped them, but it's getting worse because landlords are now exiting because they're thinking, there's no point. This is a market I don't want to be in anymore. I could see the writing on the wall where they're going with Patrick Harvey and the Greens saying that we're going to have capped rents. Capped rents, by the way, is nothing to be afraid of. I have a funny feeling that capping the rents is actually going to cost them a lot more money than it does just now, because they're going to tell everybody what the rent cap is then, aren't they? What do you think people like me are going to do? It's like, I'm charging, I know I'll be charging a lot less than that. Okay, I'll just put it up to that because that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, how stupid is that? So, because they're not going to be able to do that, and they're not going to be able to put it too low, because the people that are actually charging a lot more for things like student lets and that, because that will be included in that, I'll then have to then say, well, I can't do the student let market anymore, which will suffer on universities, which will suffer on intake, which will suffer on skills, which will suffer on, guess what? That's your doctors, your lawyers, your physicians, all these people of the future. You're affecting right now, and that's what the market's affecting right now.
And it knocks onto all of the economies in those areas, doesn't it?
They have no idea about the ramifications of what they're doing. I mean, the prospect of the Bank of England's base rates hitting 6% by the middle of 2023 is proving a strong motivating factor for buyers to lock in a deal now. Now, I don't think for a 1 minute the base rates are going to go anywhere near 6%. There is charts, and I'll still have to digest the information I took in yesterday about people saying that the swap rates are now way up here instead of what they were going to be here. Because I was told by the Bank of Scotland when I was getting lending maybe 6 months ago or 7 months ago that there would be a certain rate. Base rates will probably move to about 3.25. That'll be fine. And I went, yeah, that's okay, that's fine. So now they're predicting base rates might go up to about 5 or 6%, but inflation is not going to be as bad because the price cap has been put on, which is 5 percentage points in terms of inflation. So inflation was predicted to be 13%. So in actual fact, it'll probably be 8% now overall. So I have a sneaking suspicion you'll see inflation start to come down for that reason. So in the short term, the rent market is turning tenants into buyers, and the current lending storm is seen as the last chance for a while to buy a home with relatively good interest rates. Holiday homes as well. Look at serviced accommodation. Scotland's put in place, we're going to stop you now. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to put legislation in place where you've got to get planning permission. We've actually got people with second homes now, or holiday homes, serviced accommodation. So they've got tourism coming in all the time with it, and they've got people filling them all the time, spending money in the local economy. They are now saying, well, I'm actually not going to apply for the planning permission anymore. I'm just going to sell the house. What is that going to do to tourism for the local economy?
Yeah.
The knock-on effect.
Supply chain. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think they truly understand, and they don't. Do you know why they don't truly understand? Because when they announced on the 6th of September that they were going to put a moratorium and a freeze on rents and a moratorium on evictions, they didn't have any coherent strategy about how they were going to do that. It's only 2 days ago or 3 days ago they've actually announced that, this is how we're going to do it. And it's like, all right, it's taking you a month from actually saying that to do it. I mean, what an erratic behaviour for someone just to say, this is what I'm going to do. It's like, okay, so how are you going to do that? Oh, well, we're not sure yet. We're going to work it out first. Holy shit. Who does that?
Yeah. It's like you said previously, though, it's that fear as well of the unknown that they give, because they're not supplying people with facts. They're giving them just the headlines. So then people then have spent 4 weeks working out what that really means to them. Yeah. And have a vision in their mind that actually is not a factual situation. So then you've got to then work to how do you change that mindset. That's not an easy thing to do, is it? And that's why it impacts the market so much.
Yeah, it seems to be a strategy from both governments about it's quite incoherent. They don't understand what they're doing. I mean, you could tell that by the mini budget. The mini budget was put in place, and then they said, "Did you consult the Office of Budget Responsibility on the decrease of the high rate tax?" And they went, "No." Okay. So previous governments have always consulted the Office of Budget Responsibility to do that. So why have you not consulted them? Oh, well, we didn't feel that that was really necessary. It's like, oh my God, really? And then it's the classic example of the Scottish government. Did you consult anybody about the fact that you're going to do this with the rent freezes and the moratorium and the planning permission for holiday homes and stuff like that? Well, no, but we'll work it all out as we go along. It's like we seem to have this attitude in our society today that we'll just make up headlines, we'll just put things in place, and then we'll work out later on how we're going to do that. But we're just going to stop people doing it now for no apparent reason. We've not got any conclusive strategy about what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. It's, you know, it is, Linda actually says it, it's never any joined up thinking. It's ludicrous. It is actually ludicrous. There's no joined up thinking in this. The worst thing as well is we've now got to a government, and this is becoming real political, isn't it? But, it's not political really, because it's just it's the government. It's not. I'm not really bothered about the party. It's not the party I'm going on about. It's the government. It's the decisions that the government's coming to, because they all have to agree or disagree or whatever, and they come to a majority, and then they have to decide. But it's the government. Think about every single time. What do you think is going to happen if mortgage rates do go up to 6%, 7%, 8% base rates? Do you think the government is now going to be allowed to let people's houses be repossessed, considering they bailed us out for the pandemic, and then considering they bailed us out for utilities? What do you think they're going to be expected to do when that happens? They're going to be expected to bail us out. Yeah, and we've now got into a mindset of, I tell you what, we'll just print more money every single time we've got a problem, and that's not a healthy economy. That's a rockery, a slippery slope to oblivion. But they've done it so much, and they've spent and printed so much money and started to put so much money into the economy that they've now got into that expectation that we're just going to bail ourselves out every single time. That's what we've done. We've created a dependent society. Now, I'll tell you, I'm not dependent at all, and I never will be, and I always set out to be like that, because there's nothing that anybody does that will affect any decisions that I make, because I made sure I was completely independent, and my income would never be based on anybody else's decisions. It will never affect me at all, and that's 30 years it's taken me to get to that point. But most of our society is based on that principle that a decision made by government will affect everybody. And we've left the government to do that. And I think that's what will happen. If anything happens with the mortgage market, the government's going to be expected or have to step in again and just actually bail everybody out. And I always say, just make sure you're running faster than the other person. Because if the bear's chasing you, the bear's going to get the person that's behind you first before they get you. So just make sure you're running faster. Make sure you're in a better position. Make sure you've got more money to last on. Make sure you've got maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year's worth of money tucked aside to make sure you can survive any downturn. Recessions, on average, for the last 120 years, have only lasted 1.25 years on average every single time. The boom that happens after recessions lasts 9 years in terms of what happens. So you can last at least 1.5 to 2 years. You're quids in if a recession comes along. What happened to this recession? It's not here yet. You know, we were talking about 6 months ago. We are in recession, everybody says. Everybody was talking about we're in recession, we've got a recession. And it's like we've still not got this recession because it's 2 periods of negative growth, 2 quarters of negative growth. It's still not here. Are we ever going to get a recession? I tell you what, it's back next year and we'll find out.
Exactly. So anyway, let's get us back on track, Jim. So we've talked about the market and stamp duty and how that affects it. We've talked about, you know, are mortgages still available? We've talked about why is buyer demand still there? Is there anything else that we should be considering, Jimmy, do you think?
Well, for people out there, they won't be the only person thinking about moving in the spring. Local agents in the area will know people or know sellers who share the desired time frame, because with less available properties on the market, time frame is becoming king, really. Moving in a time frame, not going into other accommodation or living with family is becoming most important to a lot of people right now. So this can be really useful when you're looking to make improvements to your home you're buying, because you'll run into delays with booking contractors. We'll know about that. Everybody will know about that right now. The supply chain issues still hanging over from the pandemic, and people are waiting months and months to get work done. I know when it was the pandemic, we had to wait about 3 months to get a skip. I don't think it'll be that bad now, but I'm sure, Jim, you probably know with some of the refurbs that you've had on, and you might have your own contractors, but it is taking a little bit longer for things to get done.
Just to say, Stephen, we'll answer your questions just towards the end of this. We're about to finish off, but we'll answer your questions. I've got them here. And so we'll bring that up because Stephen's asked a couple of questions, so is Jeanette as well. So, it does take a wee bit longer. Contractors are taking a wee bit longer. Some of the contractors are saying, I'm not even going to quote.
Yeah.
And I'm like, guess what? Mr. Contractor or Mrs. Contractor, guess what's going to happen in a downturn? You're not even going to be considered. So if you come back to me and say, can I get some work? Guess what the answer is going to be? No. So you have to keep the people sweet that you've always looked after. This is what happened in the rise as well. I had a contractor I used all the time and we worked together very, very well. But then he started to say to me, it's like, oh, I don't really want to do the fiddly jobs anymore, the wee ones, like changing a tap or changing a radiator, stuff like that. I really just want to do the big jobs. And I went, but you need to do them to help me. And they said, no, I just want to do the big jobs. I went, okay, I'll just get somebody who'll do the fiddly jobs. And the fiddly jobs were getting done and the wee jobs were getting done. And then they started doing the big jobs for me as well. And then he came back to me in the recession when it took a downturn and said, have you got any work for me? Because I'm desperate for work. And I went, well, I can't exactly tell the boy it's been loyal to me all this time to go and do one because I'm going to introduce someone else that wasn't loyal to me at all during the uptime and during the boom. So you've got a contractor out there, look after your customers all the time. Don't take that attitude that I've just said about like, I just want the big jobs. Because when we're going down again, and it will go down at some point in time, if it's not next year, the year after, it'll be sometime in the future. If we go down again, then you can't expect, someone you've not looked after to then give you work just for the sake of it, just to keep you surviving, and in preference to somebody that's actually looked after them all that time. It's loyalty more than anything. I'm a big believer in loyalty. Very, very loyal to people that are loyal to me. So finding a home now and agreeing to a delayed completion date, you'll have plenty of time to identify suitable contractors in advance. Yep, as you said, and book them in advance and coincide with the moving date as well. Submit any requests for planning permission or building regulations in time to have them approved before you own your next property. And also finalise designs and order materials so that works can be finished as soon as possible after you move in. The key here is it's called critical path analysis. Look it up in Google, critical path analysis. It's working out at what stages you need jobs to get done in order to make sure it's as efficient as possible in that timeline. So you've maybe got 6 months to do a job to get everything started and to move into a property. But you might need someone else to do a job before someone else starts that job. In other words, you might need the electrics done in a kitchen before the kitchen's fitted. And that's the critical path. You need the electrician first, and the electrician determines when the kitchen fitter comes in. And then the kitchen fitter determines when the tiler comes in, because the tiles have to get done after the kitchen. And then, so it's that critical path. Now, if you can do jobs like the electrician's coming in, but when the electrician's coming in to do the job, to do the electrician work, is it possible that someone else could be doing another job at the same time as the electrician? Therefore, that's not part of your critical path because they can do it at the same time as the electrician. So that 2-week window the electrician was doing their job, then they could do their jobs in between that 2-week window as well. So all these jobs can be done in that 2 weeks. So 2 weeks in, then your kitchen fitter comes in and fits your kitchen. Then the guy comes in at the same time as fitting the kitchen and thinks, well, okay, when are you fitting the worktops? Well, I'm fitting it about that time, then I have to do snagging. Well, I tell you what, I'll do the tiling maybe halfway in when you're fitting the kitchen, if that's okay. So then they could bring theirs forward. And that's what critical path analysis is all about, to make sure it makes it happen for the time that you actually move in. So being able to plan upgrades on your next home so far in advance is a rare luxury. You could even ask, if you've concluded missives, the person that you're buying the property with, is there any chance I can get my contractors in to have a look at it, to make sure it's all the right sizes, and plan all the kitchens in advance and plan all the timeline, so you can hit the ground running. When I buy a rental property, sometimes the deal's done, it's concluded, but I sometimes start work on the property 2 weeks before I bought it, or maybe 2 months before I bought it, because I've given them a cast iron guarantee on buying it through my lawyer. And that's perfect. So that allows me to do all the work. So I've got all the work done, and then I start showing the tenants and I start showing the property to people while someone else has got it and someone else owns it, technically, but I'm buying it anyway. So by the time the day I buy it, I've got my electricity certificate, I've got my gas certificate, I've got all my smoke detectors in place, I've got my EICR signed, I've got my everything done, and the tenant's moving in for day one, so I'm making money from day one. That is critical path analysis in order to make that done. And sometimes that can happen with sellers and with buyers if they come to an agreement and everything's legally done in the right place. So it's something I could tell and advise someone to do, especially if you've got lots of waiting time in between. Anyway, let's come to Stephen's quick question before we finish off here. Selling a 3-bedroom semi, 5 years old in Dunfermline, Dulloch area, and and after mini budget went from circa 10 inquiries a week to 0. Is this a general position at present? Stephen, it was, yeah, because the mini budget threw everybody off completely. Everybody, it's just like the lenders pulled all their mortgage products and went, oh my God, it's like, we better take stock. And then maybe a week later, it started to ease off again and people started to come back in the market. So they should come back into the market. You should be still getting inquiries, because as we had said, buyer demand is still 20% more than the 5-year average. And if you're not, maybe you should speak to another agent and just get their opinion on what they're thinking of that. He also goes on to say, do you expect a reset in rental prices to take into account increased buy-to-let mortgage rates, noting legislation will allow landlords to increase rents to cover higher mortgage payments? Well, that's probably will not allow landlords to increase rents. In the case of the Scottish Government has actually listened in part to our lobbying, and they have said, if you can demonstrate that your mortgage payments has actually gone up and that's going to put a problem, that's going to cause a problem to you, they might consider you increasing the rent, even though the legislation says you've got a freeze on it. So they have given some dispensation. They've also given a dispensation to the rent arrears. It's usually 3 months, but they've actually moved it out to 6 months. But who can afford to have a tenant not paying rent for 6 months? I mean, that's £3,000 at £500 a month. And then you've got 6 months to actually apply to the First Street Tribunal to evict somebody. And then you've got the eviction, which another £3,000. So £6,000. Now, most people live with 1 or 2 properties for rent, most private landlords. So how can they afford to take a £6,000 hit? That's not possible. So I think it's they'll not. I think the rental prices will have to be reset. But the good thing as well is when a tenant moves out and you're about to put someone else in, all that's going to happen now, because we're allowed to put the rent up, is most landlords will put the rent up to the maximum they can get away with, probably even a bit more. So the prices in the rental market will be even worse. And that's feeding into the Scottish Government's attitude to rental price caps. This is what they'll use as evidence. But they're doing it to themselves. Do you see how that's happening? They're doing it to themselves. They are causing the problem, and then it's giving them the answer that they want in order to justify their position to put more legislation in place. Every single time. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You ever heard the expression, you get what you expect?
Yeah. Reap what you sow.
That's what the Scottish Government's expecting. They're expecting that to happen. And Jeanette says actually a really good point. Landlords should not be scapegoats. Tenants should have government support, absolutely. If they struggle with finances, no other professional people have to subsidise other people's families. When do you walk into a shop and say to the person, I tell you what, I'll use your product for nothing and I don't need to pay for it, and I'll hand it back to you and I'll still not need to pay for it? Mentally. Never. But our market does that. Anyway, let's wrap up here. My final words on this. There's much to think about when you move home, even more so when your plans change course. So if you're considering selling in Fife or anything like that, please feel free to contact us. We'll give you the right advice on how to move forward on this. And we'll see you next week for the Fife Property Show. Listen, tomorrow night I'll be doing the update on the Fife property market, and then we've got our wealth creation show on Monday at 12:30. And it's bye-bye for now.
Thanks, guys.
Bye,
Have a great
everyone.
day.